I'll mention that we are streaming on Facebook. I'll go ahead and post the link to that too, in case you wanted to share it on your social media pages. But with that, we'll go ahead and just jump right in. Thank you again for joining us. This is the Sierra Club's weekly legislative update, which is a series dedicated to updating our activist network about all the happenings of the General Assembly, the priority legislation that's going on, the status of those bills, as well as just kind of giving an overview of the issues that we're trying to address during the General Assembly session. So I'm Tim Sawinski. I'm the communications manager for the Sierra Club Virginia chapter. I'm a bit of the host of this series, but really I'm joined by speakers who are much more intelligent and knowledgeable on these issues than I am. Today we are joined by two great guest speakers from Clean Virginia, Kendall Colvenberg and Lizzy Hilton. Hilton, is that right? I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. It's actually Hilton.
Hilton,
just spelled differently. It's been almost everyone guesses wrong. So
yeah. Shot in the dark, and I'm also someone with a last name that people get wrong all the time. So my apologies. But yeah, so Clean Virginia is going to be joining us to talk about rate reform legislation. But before we get into that, we just want to update everybody about the priority legislation the Sierra Club Virginia chapter and our intrepid lobbying team is a part of, and our legislative chair, Bob Shippey, is going to overview that right now.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks to everyone for joining. We have been very busy this week on a number of bills. I'm just going to highlight 5 items very quickly before we get into the meat of our discussion today. They all happen to be House bills. First, you all know that clean transportation has been a huge focus of not only the Sierra Club this year, but several other organizations that have partnered to really kind of push on this critical area of carbon emissions. And so Lamont Bagby's bill in the House, HB 1965, did pass through committee and is actually to the floor. So that's good news. We'll see how it gets through the full floor. I feel very good about that. And then we'll see what happens when it gets to the always exciting Senate. Second bill that I'll talk about is around EV rebates. This, because we're talking about transportation here. The bill came up this morning and did pass out of committee. So we'll see how this thing fares. It's basically a program that will enable Virginians to afford electric vehicles and try to bump up the demand side, just like the Clean Cars bill bumps up the supply side. So we're trying to work both sides of the equation to electrify the transportation sector in Virginia. So feel pretty good about that on the House side. Moving away from transportation, but another part of our economy, if you will, that is responsible for enormous amounts of emissions, the building sector. So some of you know that we've been working on a bill in both the House and the Senate, actually, around ensuring that Virginia's building codes are kept up to date. Seems like a really obvious thing. Everyone I talk to says, well, who could ever be against keeping our building codes up to date? There's safety issues, there's health issues, there's cost savings for occupants on all of these things. And indeed, you're right if you're talking about normal people, but unfortunately, we've got some other people that oppose this for their own special, their own agendas, mainly home builders, realtors, and other corporate interests. So not to bore you with all the details, because that could take the whole call, but the Senate version we kind of pulled because it was getting nowhere. The House version is also in trouble, and without, again, going into too much detail, it's been watered down to the point where we're very concerned and may have to pull our support for the bill, but we're still working with the patron, Kay Corey, to try to make something out of that bill. It did, the poor version passed out of committee, but it's not necessarily good news. So stay tuned on building codes. That's HB 2227. Shifting over to a program that you may not have heard of. It's percentage of income payment program, the PIP program. This is a somewhat little known feature of the Clean Economy Act from last year, where I think very well-meaning intent was to make sure that to the degree that offshore wind and some of the other renewable energy sources may temporarily cost a little bit more than the fossil fuels had, that will create some cost pressure, some ratepayer pressures. And we don't want to harm low-income Virginians in this as we transition. So this program was basically designed to help those who are in the lower income strata to pay for that incremental cost. And so we thought that we were kind of off and running on that program, but on December 23rd, the SEC issued an order that said, we're not sure what to do to implement this. So please, General Assembly, give us more guidance. That was not a good Christmas present for us. So we scrambled to try to find someone that would. Sierra Club is very, kind of invested in this space because we want renewable energy, but we don't want to burden, and we'll talk about energy burden quite a bit here this morning, but we don't want to burden ratepayers with some of these costs. So basically there's a fee that will be put on. It's similar to fees that we see on phone bills and cable bills sometimes, where it's, universal service fee. Anyway, long story short, we worked to help get a bill drafted, and it did pass out of committee last night. It got sent to appropriations because there is some financial aspect to this to kind of administer it. We don't feel too worried about that, but there are stakeholders that still are concerned and want to amend the bill. So we're still working with the patron on that. Feel like it will move through, and frankly, I'm going to try to help address some of the concerns from stakeholders as well. Kay Corey is the patron of that one as well. Last one I'll highlight is the environmental justice bill carried by Shelley Simons, HB 2074. We're actually working on a number of environmental justice bills this session. There's quite a few of them, which is a great thing. We're working with the administration and of course many of the community impacted communities on trying to make these bills in general give communities that have been frankly abused in the past in terms of our fossil fuel policies and development of infrastructure and the like, and do a number of things, give them more of a say in permitting, more notice, have the agencies of the administration require them to assess environmental justice impacts in everything they do, really. Anyway, without going into all of those details, the Simons bill, it was supposed to be up this morning, it was pulled. But again, not for a bad reason. One of the chairs over on the House side wanted to amend it to make sure it gets through. That too will have to go through one of the money committees, and he wanted to make sure that it was bulletproof to get through. So we feel pretty good about that one. Again, it's Simons HB 2074. So those are 5 of our priorities. None of them are dead yet, which is good, I guess. They're all kind of in working mode and still being amended, I think it's fair to say. So that's just kind of headlines, but I'm open for questions and I'm also open for us passing the baton over to our next speaker.
Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate it. As you all can tell, our intrepid lobbying team is really busy and covering a wide range of different legislation. So I appreciate all of the updates. But as Bob mentioned, if you have questions about these, feel free to use the chat box below. So moving forward, just with our agenda, so as we mentioned before at the top, the topic of our discussion today is energy burdens. And to talk about a little bit more about what that looks like and how it impacts Virginians specifically is our campaign and policy director, Kelsey Crane.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I'm really glad that we're talking about this topic today. And I'm just going to briefly kind of define what energy burden is and then hand it over to Clean Virginia. They're going to talk about kind of how we got here and how we're going to fix it hopefully through this legislative session. But energy burden or electricity burden is a measure of the affordability of our electricity rates. It's the percentage of the amount of our a household income that goes towards electricity costs. And it's generally agreed that about 6% of household income is considered affordable for energy burden. but over 75% of Virginia's households pay over that. So our over 75% of households pre-COVID in Virginia had a higher than average electricity burden that is unaffordable. So nationally, the average is about 2.7%, but our average in Virginia is 3.1%, which means that we are continuing to pay more of our money towards electricity costs, and that especially low-income households experience a much larger burden and much larger impacts of having an across-the-board higher than average electricity burden. Here in Virginia, that means that households have to make decisions that they shouldn't have to make between keeping the lights on and providing other important needs for their family. So it is definitely something that we need to be addressing, and is the result of Dominion and APCO, who are key utilities in the state, who are generally monopolies, finding ways to keep their rates artificially high and to keep our bills, unfortunately, higher than we should be paying for the services that we see here in Virginia. So there have been some efforts to make sure that this is known across the board, that our legislators know that this is an issue and that they're looking at tackling this issue. And especially if we are seeing more and more legislators that are understanding how Dominion has used their power in the legislature to their benefit and to keep their profits high, and are looking at ways to stand up to that influence and to make sure that we are passing laws that are the interest of residents and the interest of ratepayers. So it's really a huge issue to be looking at and to consider as we are reshaping our electricity portfolio here in Virginia and continuing to find ways to make it equitable and have a just transition to clean energy. This is something that we need to be addressing now, though. I'm going to turn it over to our experts to talk through what we can be doing, a little bit more about what this issue means for Virginians.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelsey and Tim, and just the whole Sierra Club for having us here today. My name is Kendall. I'm the advocacy and outreach lead here with Clean Virginia, and I'm joined by Lizzy, who is our political and legislative director, who's going to be talking a little bit later on about more of the specifics of some of the rate-making legislation we're really excited to see up this session. But first, just to give a really quick overview of what Clean Virginia is, we are an independent advocacy organization working to fight corruption in Virginia politics in order to promote clean energy and community control over our energy policy. And so if you have any questions about anything we're about to chat about today, or if you're interested in getting involved, please feel free to reach out. You can check out our website at cleanvirginia.org, and all the information is going to be there. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about kind of how we got here. So I'm going to talk about the way that utility monopolies like Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power Company are regulated in the state, or in some ways I should say are not regulated properly in our state. And so together, these two utility monopolies, so Dominion and APCO, they actually control 81% of the energy market in Virginia. And because both of them are monopolies, it means that those customers, so that 81% of Virginian households have no choice when it comes to where they get their energy from. And so in exchange for this monopoly status, Dominion and APCO are supposed to be regulated by the General Assembly and the State Corporation Commission, or the SEC. In an ideal world, those regulators would be setting fair electricity rates and utility profit levels in order to ensure that Virginians are protected from, price gouging. But in reality, what actually has happened is that Dominion and APCO have spent years and years donating to political candidates and lobbying legislators to pass bills that tip the scales in their favor. In fact, Dominion Energy is actually the largest corporate donor in Virginia's in the entire history of the state. And what's worse is the fact that the primary source for these donations is from our electricity bills. So we're basically, and we don't have a choice in the matter, right? So we cannot take our business elsewhere. And we are basically footing the bill for political spending that curries favor for legislators to create a more favorable regulatory environment for corporate interests and shareholder profits. And unfortunately, the main consequence of monopoly utilities' outsized influence in our political system is an unaffordable and inequitable energy system. And so because the ability of regulators has been so restricted in order to oversee monopoly utilities fairly, Dominion has actually been allowed to overcharge us. They've been allowed to overcharge above their authorized profit level by more than $500 million since 2017 alone. So the exact numbers from Dominion's number, it could be actually higher than this, but their number is they've overcharged us by $502.7 million since 2017. And so those massive excess profits have translated, as Kelsey mentioned, into very real financial impacts for Virginians. So we now pay the 6th highest power bills in the nation. And as she mentioned, even before COVID, 75% of Virginia households reported an unaffordable energy burden. And I'd like to emphasize too, that this problem really hits Virginia's low income and minority communities particularly hard. And so actually, according to the National Resources Defense Council, 3 times as many Black and 2 times as many Latinx households reported making serious sacrifices to afford their utility bills compared to non-community of color households. So that's the problem, right? But here's the good news. So this year's legislative session, which is happening right now, this is actually our chance to get that money back, that $500 million back into Virginians' pockets. And it's also our chance to restore regulators' ability to lower our electric bills moving forward. And so there are actually 6 key energy bills that are going to be up for a vote this coming Monday at 7 a.m. in the House Labor and Commerce Energy Subcommittee. And together, these 6 bills will go a very long way towards restoring a balance between the interests of utilities and the interests of Virginians who are just trying to pay their electric bills. Everyone watching right now has the power to make sure that this happens, but you're going to have to make sure that your voices are heard by legislators before the bills come up for a vote this coming Monday. So I'm actually going to turn things over to Lizzy now to talk more about the specifics of these 6 bills and what we're really what we're hoping to achieve by passing them through the legislature.
Awesome, thanks, Kendall. And so as I think Kendall and Tim mentioned, my name is Lizzy Hilton. I am Clean Virginia's political and legislative director. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today, joining and talking with all of you all. Just want to start, by thanking everyone. I know how difficult it is, to be kind of even in a normal session when we're all in person, to be advocating for good, energy policy and environmental policy, and just how crazy it is to stay on top of everything that happens during session. So, and then yet alone this year where we're doing everything remotely. So want to start by just saying thank you to everyone on this call. The amount, I know I've seen the work you all have been doing of, calling legislators, sending emails, and it definitely does make a difference. And so just want to thank everyone before jumping in. It really is crucial, and you guys and your voices are really, really important to this process. So yeah, just to talk a little bit about it, to pick up kind of where Kendall left off. So, as we've, as we've sort of discussed, right, energy burden is this massive problem in Virginia. We pay the 6th highest energy bills in the country. And there are a lot of factors that go into that, particularly when you look at the vertically integrated monopolies in Virginia. But one key part of energy burden and the reason our bills are so high is because we are being overcharged every single year by hundreds of millions of dollars, which is not surprising. If you're being charged hundreds of millions of dollars more than you are supposed to be, that's probably why your bills are too high. And by too high, I mean they just are much higher than they should be. And so just, to make sure kind of everyone, I know a lot of you, this is going to be a little repetitive, but just want to make sure we're all, if you're newer to this issue, just, all have the same language when talking about these bills. So when you have a vertically integrated monopoly, and I think Kendall did a great job talking about this already, but what you have to kind of remember is different in that, if you are just an energy company in a competitive marketplace, you face competition and that, is an incentive to drive your prices down. But when you have, a situation like we do in Virginia, and because customers have no choice, you could charge as much as you wanted to, for electricity. And that's why the state has a unique responsibility in figuring out what is a fair profit for you to earn, well, going and looking at, what would you earn if you were a competitive market, and then making sure that that is the profit that you do earn. So utilities, when they produce energy, every penny they send on every wire, every employee, every, power plant that they build, they get to recover all of those costs from Virginians in something called, basically the base rate. And then on top of that, they get to make a guaranteed profit, which if anyone has ever invested in a stock, or is a Reddit user and is currently investing in GameStop, you can, a guaranteed return is a pretty sweet deal. But that's where the state's importance really comes in, because there's nothing stopping them from just charging you, $100 million, right, for your energy bill. What would you do? You could pay that, or you could, I guess, go off the grid, right? And so that's why the state's role in this is so crucial. And what if by nature of the fact that even Dominion is admitting to having overcharged Virginians by more than $500 million since 2017, we know something has gone wrong in our system. And so it has been quite some time since the state has been able to do what they are supposed to do and used to do kind of every other year, which is look at the rates or the energy prices that Virginia, that the utility monopolies are charging Virginians, and look at them and say, does this reflect the cost that these utilities actually spend, plus, what we've determined to be a fair and, allowed profit. And they have not actually, so we've not had a rate case in almost a decade. And that's what this audit process is called. It's a rate case where you look at it and you determine, and by you, I mean, is the regulators, which in Virginia is the State Corporation Commission, or SEC. So these regulators go in and they audit everything, the full books, and then they make adjustments, ideally, so that if they're charging too much, rates will go down and that extra money should go back. But what, as Kendall said, what we have seen over the course of the last couple of decades in Virginia is such a huge amount of political spending. And I know, the club is not a stranger to this problem and has fought against this for years. And I know a lot of people on this call, just seeing some of the faces on here, have been doing great work fighting against this. And we saw a lot of other symptomatic problems of this, like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline too. When you put this much money into a political system, the outcome that you get to kind of write for yourself. But essentially what that has led to is a self-regulated monopoly in Virginia. This isn't a sort of left versus right. Is this monopoly overregulated or underregulated? They're just self-regulated. They've essentially written all of the laws in Virginia, and which has gotten us to a point where the regulators cannot in fact do their job. So there are basically just a series of anti-consumer, pro-monopoly provisions put into the law that is preventing the regulators from being able to lower rates so that we do not have these overcharges moving forward, give back the money that people were overcharged, and just make sure that bills stay affordable for everyone. And so that is sort of what this suite of bills that will be up in the House on Monday seek to do. So there's a lot of them, and I don't want to spend too much time kind of going into the weeds on all of them, but I can kind of run through, I guess, maybe give you all the numbers. And I think we can make sure this gets sent around as well. But so there's a bill, HB 1835 from Delegate Suhas Subramaniam, which will be looking at one of the problems we have in Virginia is that the SEC has just for Dominion Energy, there is an artificial cap on how much you can lower energy bills. So even though we know that they're overcharging around $200–300 million a year, you can't lower rates by more than $50 million. It's like a fifth of the problem. So getting rid of that cap is hugely important. Dan Helmer has a bill, which is HB 1914, and that is to get rid of these accounting gimmicks that Dominion uses to basically change the time period in which they are paid back for large expenses, so that they can pretend like they didn't overcharge us when in fact they did. So kind of getting rid of these accounting tricks. There's HB 1984, which is Sally Hudson's bill, which is my delegate from Charlottesville. And that is sort of a fun bill. It's very simple. It's just a couple of sentences saying, you know what, just let the SEC do what's fair, let us set a fair profit, set a fair rate, and they can determine what fair means. So just trust the regulators to be the regulators and ignore all the other kind of gunked up code that we've had in Virginia. There's then HB 2049, which is being carried by Delegate Jeff Bourne. This is a bill that's pretty crucial. So utilities have kind of two main ways to recover costs if they want to build a new project. So like offshore wind, or anything else. They can recover on the base rate, they can recover it through a rack. But then they added a new mechanism. It's never been tested. There's a lot of questions about how it will actually even work, where they can take a project that's already been approved, that they already are guaranteed to get their costs recovered somewhere else, and basically use that to disappear the money that they should be giving as refunds, which also then allows them to get out of lowering rates in the future. So it essentially, streamlines that process so that they can't use a project that's been approved to get out of refunds. Then so Delegate Jay Jones and Delegate Lee Ware, who led a big bill last year that came very close, one vote away in Commerce and Labor, are back with a bill that I love. It's one of my favorites, where it's sort of, instead of getting rid of all of these bad provisions of the code, like so many of these other ones does, it pretty much goes through the code and looks at all these provisions where it says, the regulators shall follow this, terrible pro-monopoly provision. It just changes that word shall to the word may. So, and that basically takes the handcuffs off of the regulators so that they can follow this pro-monopoly anti-consumer provision, but it's actually their choice instead of the law forcing them to do so. And then finally, the last bill, which is being carried by Delegate Kathy Tran after her bill and a bill from Delegate Schuyler Van Valkenburg kind of merged in the drafting period. Well, right now, when we are overcharged and they go through all the costs of the rate case, they, you would expect that, okay, fine, maybe they have these accounting gimmicks to get rid of the money. Maybe they, can take these overcharges and use it for projects that they could expense a different way. But if there's anything left over after that, you would expect that at least that would go back to customers, but that's actually not the case. Dominion basically gets to just keep some of those overcharges, which essentially functions as a bonus that incentivizes them to overcharge customers, because they get to keep first they have a guaranteed that allowed profit. They get to keep sort of a bonus profit above that. And then anything that's left over after they've already kept that bonus profit, they then just get to keep 30% of that money. So that we are the only state in the country that has a provision like this. And it is only for two utilities, Dominion and APCO. So, I mean, talk about a sweetheart deal. They are literally, we have written into law that two companies get a bonus that's not based on performance, but is actually based off of, did they overcharge their customers? So that's obviously something would make a lot of sense to get rid of. So yeah, those are the bills. And I want to make sure we're saving time for questions. So I might just stop there. But the one thing I do want to emphasize, because I just kind of went through and gave the chief patrons, which are all Democrats, but this is a hugely bipartisan effort, which we're very excited about. There's a lot of, I think there's 27 legislators currently signing up who have signed on as patrons, chief co-patrons or co-patrons. And a lot of those are Republicans. So this is very, very much a bipartisan push. And again, and just to maybe remind everyone, the importance of this, right? I mean, Virginians are, we pay the 6 highest bills in the country. 75% of Virginians before the pandemic had an unaffordable energy burden. That's according to a study that the Virginia Poverty Law Center put out. We are already, again, before COVID hit, we were at an affordability crisis point when it came to people's utility bills. And that is even more true now. And why this is so important this year is because this year is when Dominion will be having its first rate case in a very, very long time. And so that $500 million that we've been overcharged, if we do not change the rules to allow the regulators to give that back to Virginians, and again, Virginians really need that back and they really need affordable bills moving forward, we will never be able to get that money back again. It is truly a now or never. You cannot go back later after the rate case and get that money back later. And the next rate case won't be until 2024. So essentially, this rate case will be happening this year, but if we do not fix the rules that are governing that rate case so that the SEC, like it did for over 100 years before Dominion started, dumping money into the political system in the way that they've, been doing recently, if we do not, give them back that authority this year, we will not get any of that $500 million, likely a lot more, in overcharges back, and we will continue to pay bills that are much higher than they should be for at least until 2024, which will be the next opportunity to revisit this. So the timing of this could not be more crucial. And that's why we're, excited that we have such a strong team of patrons working on it, such a strong group of partners, across a lot of different interest groups that support this. And again, I'm very excited to have people like you who are interested and engaged on this and willing to call their legislators and make sure that they know that, people are paying attention to this and they want to be treated fairly by our government and by our utilities, and they want their money back. So I'm happy to pause for questions, but very, very excited you all are here to support these.
Thank you, Lizzie and Kendall. I also just put in the chat the Clean Virginia form for contacting your representatives about these pieces of legislation, and to make sure that, especially, it's crucial, as you mentioned, Lizzie, before Monday's committee hearing, that they hear from as many people as possible to make sure that they can see that there is public demand for these types of bills for a more fair utility system. Just a couple of questions that I've seen over Facebook, but I guess this is a little bit more, but I think you've spoke about this a little bit, but also we were wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the equity implications of this issue. I think Kendall mentioned how it really impacts people of color and communities of color the most, but like, I don't know if it's possible to go into a little bit more about what that looks like for these communities.
Yeah, I can maybe take a first stab at that, and Kendall then jump in if I've missed anything, which I'm sure I will. So, as we've kind of talked about a little bit already, right? This is something that sort of like all systemic problems that happen that kind of exist in Virginia. They tend to hit minority and low-income communities the hardest. And so, some of the numbers, the studies that Kendall already mentioned, African-American households are 3 times as likely to have to make serious sacrifices to pay their utility bills. Latinx households are twice as likely to have to make serious sacrifices to pay their utility bills and electricity bills. So that's, this is a problem we know because of all the other systemic ways that kind of poverty often aligns with race in Virginia and in America, that these communities are much more harder hit. It also becomes a really big issue for people who live in, for example, Section 8 housing. We've talked with individuals and families who live in Section 8 housing, and they're these are often old buildings that haven't had a lot of investment or public investment. Which means that they are not weatherized and they're not energy efficient buildings. And, we've talked with people who their energy bill is the same, they pay as much in their energy bill as a month as they do on their rent. And so, so that is, so it's something that is just compounded. And, if you are in low income or getting other forms of assistance, you actually are the most impacted. And obviously the PIP bill that Bob mentioned earlier is going to hopefully help with that as well for those individuals. But we have to kind of tackle this affordability problem. And, a little bit about this during COVID. So there was a great piece this morning by Patrick Wilson that ran in both ProPublica and the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And Delegate Hudson, who's carrying one of these bills, had a really powerful sort of quick story about how when she in her last campaign was knocking doors, talked to a woman who was about to be evicted, and she really pointed to her high utility bills as the thing that pushed her over the edge. Virginia, if you've ever looked at eviction data in Virginia, we are one of the worst states, and again, this is pre-pandemic, one of the worst states in the country on evictions. Richmond is, if you look at, Princeton has a great eviction lab where they have great data on just the eviction crisis around the country. And if you look at the top cities, I think we've got something like 7 of the top 15 highest eviction rates in the country are for the large cities are in Virginia, with Richmond being something like number 2 or 3. And mid-sized cities is the exact same thing, with Portsmouth, I think, either at 1 or 2. So, it's a big problem. And I think 1 out of 10 evictions in Virginia are for delinquencies less than $250. So, you can easily see how your utility bills and having high electricity bills really plays a role there. And so, and that, particularly with COVID, this has always been more important. And this is, you can quickly see kind of how this stacks, right? Where you have communities like African-American and Latinx communities, which have been, so disproportionately impacted by COVID. They're also much more likely to have to make serious sacrifices even before COVID to pay their utility bills. We've also now seen some really powerful and just, alarming studies on the link between eviction and homelessness and COVID and disease. And so just the, the way all of this stacks together, right, it just creates a really, really worrisome picture, which is just why I think, again, making sure people's, there's a lot of factors that go into this, particularly with COVID, but this is, the piece that particularly if you care about energy and we're working on energy policy, obviously transitioning to clean energy is the right thing to do. We all know it, but it is going to cost money. And, we have an affordability problem already in Virginia. And so, if we want to be moving to the clean energy future that we all want to move towards, we need to be doing something as well to help fix the affordability problem, which is what we are excited that these bills will really do.
Thanks for saying that. Yep. Sometimes have to tell folks that, transitioning to clean energy and keeping our electric bills and our utilities system fair and affordable are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they can be one and the same, and they should be one and the same. So the term just transition comes from. I wanted to see if anyone else wanted to add in anything about either the equity implications of this or any other points they wanted to make about the priority, the rate reform legislation. Here we go. I did have another question. This is, would this legislation impact just people in Dominion territory or all Virginians?
Yeah, so it would be Dominion and APCO service territory. So if you're in a co-op, the rules are different. You don't have all of these sort of, and co-ops are just very different, right? In that they're community owned. And if there are ever any overcharges, they sort of just immediately go back to customers. There's no sort of investors or large, for-profit corporation to pocket them. So co-ops are sort of are literally regulated in a different section of the code, and so would not be impacted. But this would impact. Dominion has a rate case this year. APCO had one last year, so obviously we can't change anything about last year, this year. But it would change the rules for APCO moving forward. And if you were following the APCO rate case at all from last year, the State Corporation Commission found that APCO did overcharge its customers, but because of some of these pro-monopoly provisions that these bills would fix, even though they found that APCO overcharges customers by tens of millions of dollars, they were not allowed, the SEC was not allowed to tell APCO to refund that money, and they also were not allowed to tell APCO to lower rates, which is, again, just the proof of a broken system. They found that there were overcharges, they could not refund them, and they could not lower rates so that people won't be overcharged for the next 3 years. So, that
should have been the title of this.
Yeah, really, it really is. And so, it's a great example of that's why we're trying to fix things for Dominion, which has, been, APCO is overcharging, but not to the same scale that Dominion is. So the problem is definitely worse with Dominion, but this would at least fix things for APCO, when it comes up for its next rate case in 2023 as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I know we're getting closer to the end moment of this, but I wanted to, first off, we're again really thankful that Kendall and Lizzy could come and speak on this issue and on these bills with us. And so we wanted to see if there was any other priority legislation that you have that may be seemingly unrelated, but probably is related to all this, considering this is what you all do. But yeah, that we didn't cover today that you wanted to give a quick plug for.
Yeah, I might just plug, Clean Virginia, we sort of really focus on the nexus of clean governance and clean energy. And, as I think everything we've talked about so far with rate making shows that if we don't have good governance and transparency and are also fixing some of these political contributions problems, we are going to not get the just, clean, equitable transition we all want and deserve. And so 2 bills that we're very excited about that are still alive. One we think is a great bill carried by Delegate David Reed that helps, and I don't have these bill numbers in front of me, I'm sorry, but it helps basically creates a fund for professional development for staff. So we think a highly trained staff is very important in the General Assembly, and it helps keep people, working for government and able to, that fund could be used to go to conferences if they wanted to attend a conference to learn more about rate making or to learn more about clean energy and solar. There would actually be funds to do that so we can start building more in-house expertise with our legislators. And then the second, so Virginia is the only state in the country where it is legal to take money that was given to your campaign and just use it for whatever personal use you want. So if you want to use it for a vacation to the Bahamas, that's legal. If you want to use it to buy yourself a car, which people have done in the past, that's legal. If you want to use it to go to a gun show, which people have also done in the past, that's also legal. It's illegal federally. It's illegal in 49 states. It is unbelievable that it's legal in Virginia. The good news is that Delegate Marcus Simon has a bill, as is HB 1952, that passed out of subcommittee and committee unanimously. And so that is up for a House vote, I think, on Monday. And then we'll be going over to the Senate. A different version of this bill passed the House unanimously in 2018 when the Republicans were in charge, and then the Republican Senate never gave it a hearing. So we're hoping that'll be different this time, but I think that would be a great thing just in terms of good governance that I think would help all the problems that people face in government. If they couldn't be using the money that they're given often by corporate interests, which again, no caps on how much money can be given. If they couldn't use that to finance their own lifestyles, we think that could really improve government outcomes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kendall, Lizzy. Really appreciate it. Kelsey, Bob, of course, clearly we have a lot of advocates in the General Assembly trying to do what's best for, policy that can benefit most of Virginians. And I actually learned a little bit more about energy burdens this time. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you very much for dedicating the time. I'll just make a quick announcement that this video will be processed and uploaded to Facebook, so you can check it out and share it with your network at any times. We'll also put it on our websites, on our Grassroots Conversations page. And we will also be sending out an email to all the folks who attended this with all of the links and resources that were shared in the chat box within, hopefully by the end of today. So with that, I just wanted to thank Kendall and Lizzy and Clean Virginia as a whole for all the work that you all are doing and for agreeing to be here today and educating us more about these bills, this legislation, and certainly don't envy you all for having to work on such wonkiness, but I really appreciate the work as I do for, when our legislative committee's telling me what we're working on. I'm like, I'm glad you all are in that position. So thanks again for everything. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Bob. And we'll be here next week on a topic related to clean transportation. So please check that out. And I hope everyone enjoys their weekend. So stay safe, stay healthy, and please advocate as much as possible during this General Assembly session. So take it easy.